The topic for today's session is prehistoric inventions which separated the mankind from animal. The question you must be thinking, why such hatke topic? The reason is we need to understand our past. It's important to know from where we came and how we reached here. Which inventions are game changer for our current life that we need to understand. And for that, we have a very seasoned speaker, Dr. Tejus Naik, who is by profession a pediatric orthopedic surgeon, but he's not only a doctor, he has a lot of interest in music, coin collection, for painting, bird watching. And I must say that wherever in whichever field he takes interest, he is really deep into that. I must mention about his philanthropic work of serving the school children in remote areas of Gujarat. So with that short introduction, now I hand over to Tejas Bhai. Thank you once again for joining the session. Over to you, Tejas Bhai.
Thank you very much. My voice is heard?
Yes, yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, my friends. This is a very unusual but a very interesting topic. We know that these things were invented, but we don't know how, why, and when. So the topic is prehistoric inventions that shaped the mankind. I would start by saying this, that humans lived a simple life in simple houses like this for almost 4,000 years, from 3000 BC till 1000 AD or CE. So they were living in houses, clothes, they had animals, they were doing agriculture, they had tools, but it remained very similar for all these years. From this to this modern world, it took only 1000 years. We might say approximately 1000 CE till today, and everything became modernized. But what about this concept? Early man was like this. He was hairy and he was a hunter-gatherer. From that to the simple houses, agriculture, and tools we discussed, took how long? It took more than 5 lakh years. So we can understand that that is the time when really big inventions occurred very, very slowly and changed the way man was, and then later on, 1000 years made it more modern. Now, if somebody asks us that the modern world is based on what major developments or inventions, 4 major developments that build today's modern world. I'll give you 5 seconds to think, and then I will proceed. This, we might agree, are electricity, transport, communication, and health. There are many, many smaller ones, but these 4 were the major players. So for prehistoric, what are the greatest prehistoric inventions? And there were 11 that I'm going to mention that shaped the mankind and set early man apart from animals. We were like animals from ape onwards. What made us what we are today, or what we became, say, 1000, 2000 years back? First, let me define what is prehistoric time. Prehistoric means the history is not well written, and it may be divided up to 1200 BC into Stone Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age. Why 25 lakh years? Why not longer? Because early man occurred 25 lakh years ago, till 1200 BC. And here, for your concept, I am putting this. The Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, etc., are Bronze Age. So what we are saying, an Iron Age was the Vedic era. So this is prehistoric. History is not well written or unknown. This is a simple form of how man evolved from ape. Almost 35 lakh years ago, Australopithecus came. Now, he is probably not considered full human. Many people consider him an ape walking on 2 legs. And that is why the Homo species, which we call man, actually started from Homo habilis 25 lakh years ago. No need to get into nitty-gritty of this. I'm just mentioning 4 Homo species, habilis, erectus, Neanderthal, and sapiens, because their mention will come in our talks. And Homo habilis was the one who started inventing things, not Homo sapiens. And that's why, understand, 25 lakh years ago, this invention started. Now, there were three bodily characteristics that developed over lakhs of years in man's body and brains, which facilitated human advances. And this first and greatest was the bigger brain. You can see the comparative brain size between other animals and man, and that allowed man to do a lot of things: think, plan, and advance. Second was walking upright. Once man started walking upright, his hands were free. So his hands could do lots of work, which allowed him advance. And one very important thing which we underestimate in our body, and that is a thumb which can be opposed. This thumb we can touch our little finger and palm with our thumb. The apes can't do that. Only man can. And that is why this facilitated the advances. With this, let us now straightway go on to what are these 11 prehistoric inventions. Let us go one by one. I'm not going to reveal all of them, and you will enjoy it that way. And I have arranged them chronologically. Now, first were the tools. Tool is an object that has been modified to fit a particular purpose. You might know that lower animals also use tools. Tools have been used particularly by animals like ape, even crows use tools. But these are only naturally occurring objects like stick and unmodified stones. They do not modify them. They may use it to hit, crush. The sticks are used to take out the termites from termite mounds. And that is why the tool that man made by modifying something were the real tools. The oldest tools found are 25 lakh years old, and they are found in Tanzania, Olduvai Gorge. And that is why these stone tools are called Oldowan tools. They were the simplest of tools. It is called an Oldowan tool kit because there are a variety of stones found in one place. And these were stones modified on single side. So only one side was modified. Though after Oldowan tools, there are another place, 33 lakh year old tools also have been found, but still the oldest tools are called Oldowan tools. So these are the earliest modified tools. They are not a natural form. Then came what is described as Acheulean tools, which are two edges modified. You can see these pictures that two edges have been broken and sharpened. So this was then again 25 lakh years ago, and that brought onto new Stone Age or Neolithic. Paleolithic is old Stone Age. Neolithic age started just 12,000 years ago, and more useful tools started being made. Here is just a simple example how the early man made a simple hand axe. So he took a stone, broke it with a stone, but the finer edge was created by using wood. And this was done not by Homo sapiens, because now you know that this is lakhs of years ago. Homo sapiens is thousands. And this was done by Homo habilis, who, because he started using tool, is famous as handyman. So that was the earliest man and in the Homo species who started using tools. Tools were used then to hunt animals, treating animal carcasses, defense or attack, cutting, shaping, preparing food, making another tool, and also to start fire by striking two stones, even in artwork, shaving of hair, sewing of clothes, making of huts, and lots of other things. So early tools came in handy. Besides stones, bone also was used, wood also was used, but then came Bronze Age. Bronze Age started in 3300 BC. I told you Bronze Age was our Indus Valley period. So once metals, before that there was Copper Age for a short time, and then Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. I repeat, Iron Age was our Vedic period. So when metals were invented, then there was no limit to the tools. Harpoons, fish hooks, sewing needles, bow and arrow, sling, plow, etc. Many things started being invented. So that was about tools. That was that old, 25 lakh years old. Control of fire also came in quite early. The oldest evidence of use of controlled fire is 10 lakh years old in South African cave, which are called Wonderwork caves. There are signs that there were furnaces or small fires on which man must have cooked food. So if there was a small area of fire, multiple areas in a cave, it is an evidence that he had controlled fire. But how did he do that? The first fires started occurring on Earth 40 crore years ago. Why? Because at that time, there were enough plants to produce oxygen. And we know that fire requires oxygen. So that is the time bushfires started. Bushfires, jungle fires, forest fires could occur because of rubbing of wood or lightning falling on wood. So there were fires before man. But when man saw fire, he was initially afraid it could burn him. Many died. But he also watched that some animals and grains were burnt in these fires. And he watched other animals eat those carcasses and grains. So he tried eating that flesh, cooked flesh. Obviously, it was either overcooked or undercooked, but he must have hit a balance of proper cooked food, which was available in forest fire. And that is why he wanted to bring the fire to his dwellings. This he initially did by bringing fires, burning twigs that he could bring to the dwellings, the caves or wherever he was living. But then he learned to create fire. Earliest fire created was rubbing a stick on a piece of wood or stone. The left side you see is the earliest evidence of this. And then 2 stones could be struck to get fire. Once he had fire, many things could be done. Now comes Homo erectus, which is after that. So Homo erectus started improving on use of fire in form of warmth, cooking, to provide light in the darkness, and protection from wild animals. But surprisingly, there is evidence that fire was used even for torture that early. One great advantage of fire that cooking could be done. Cooking had a profound evolutionary effect because it increased the food efficiency, allowing early man to spend less time on finding the food, chewing, and even digesting. And man's intestinal tract started becoming smaller because the food was cooked. And that also allowed more nutrients to be absorbed in the body, and the brain started growing bigger. So you can understand the fire and cooking changed so much. But what it did much more was socializing around the fire. Early man started sitting around fire because he had nothing to do most of the day and obviously in the nights. And when they were all together, the social sense developed. And they started even telling stories. And it is thought that that also must have been beginning of a language. You can imagine that because fire was controlled and could be brought near his dwelling, all these things could happen. And social gatherings allowed social norms to develop, communes, friendships, and even languages and art developed. Earliest evidence of use of fire in India is at Bijlani archaeological site in Uttar Pradesh, that is 55,000 years ago. Meenakshi. Yeah. The third invention was spoken language. Now, man started speaking, means voice developed long time ago. Speech requires obviously the breath and the mechanism, anatomy, which is vocal cords and mouth and lips. But speech going on to language is a different matter. That is encoding our thoughts into meaningful sounds. So there is actual speech which would further be developed into language. One theory of language is language developed in the Western Africa and then spread. There are other theories in which it is said that language might have developed at different places in the world simultaneously, but it started about 1.5 lakh years ago. A few theories have been put forward how language started. The one theory is called the cuckoo theory. Cuckoo theory means man started imitating cries of the beasts and birds, and that's how he also started identifying some birds. So that might have been the beginning of language. Another theory is called poo-poo theory, which is, for example, we are hurt, we shout, we are happy, we make sounds. So these sounds, which are exclamations triggered by pain, pleasure, or surprise, might have been then gradually developed into speech and language. The third theory, these are actual names of those theories, is the yo, he, ho theory. The way we, in a group, when we are doing something, we might say, dam laga ke haisha, something like that. We make some sound when there is a collective rhythmic labor. So that might have been beginning. And one very, very important and which has a lot of following is mother tongue theory. That mother started instructing the child about its safety, food, etc., or even affection. And this language evolved between mother and child, and later on it spread into adults. Whatever it was, this is another theory, yes, grooming and gossip. We know what is grooming. We see animals do that. Even we do that, tending to hair of our children or spouse, and gossip. So these actions before the language required touching. So when hands had to be used, men could not use hand for anything else. And once the voice allowed to convey this gossip in some way, or grooming in some way, or affection in some way, his hands were free. So it was very important for him to free his hands and reduce the other work so that he could make more inventions. So these are the theories of language. Now, how actually it became what we know is a big subject. I have just 3 to 4 minutes per inventions, and I cannot go haywire into more descriptions. This one theory of nostratic languages, how they grew into many languages, which here we see Dravidian, Indo-European, etc., which would include our languages. On the right side, we see 2 lists. What are the earliest language? Now, language is such a matter that there is no evidence before it was written down. I hope you understand that. There is no evidence of language before it was written down, because there was no written language. And that is why in 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris banned all the discussions about origin of languages, because it said there is no evidence. I mean, there is pointless to discuss something because it is evidenceless. That ban remained for a century, and then more theories came. So here, just as an example of confusion, we see that the first language was Egyptian, and then Sanskrit and Tamil much later. But another list says Tamil was the first language, Sanskrit, Egyptian, and others. So there have been lots of confusion, lots of variations in this. More importantly, written language, because written language ultimately gave a proof of a language. Written language is only 5,000 years old. The development of language might have occurred 1.5 lakh years ago. Written language is only this much long. And there have been 3 types, 3 stages of development of written language. First was called proto-writing, which means only symbols. Symbols meant what it showed. If it was a hand, it meant a hand. It was a bird, it meant a bird. That's all it meant. So the earliest evidence is 3500 BC. In Iraq, Kish tablets have been found, which are supposed to be the earliest writing ever. Then came logosyllabic. Logosyllabic means different symbols were used as a word. So one symbol, one word. And then the whole language developed. These are examples are Old Chinese and cuneiform language of Sumeria, and probably the Indus script, which is yet undeciphered. So these were about 5,000 years back, 3,200 BC. But actual language, as we say, language means use of alphabets to form words, and words then separated to form sentences. Now that occurred earliest in Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt, and that occurred almost 4,000 years ago, 1900 BCE. You will be surprised, the first written language evidence in India is 300 BC, and that is on Ashok Shilhalekh, which is a very important and interesting fact that the oldest language written down, which is a script, as we call script, is Ashok Shilhalekh, which is 300 BC. The fourth invention, clothing. Man did not require clothing because he had skin fur and he was living in Africa. And that is why he didn't care. I mean, early man did not require any covering. He was in warm climate and had the skin fur. But 15 lakh years ago, man lost the skin fur and became hairless. And as he traveled north slowly in North Africa and then towards Europe and Asia, he came across colder climates. This started occurring 5 lakh years ago when man was Homo erectus. So colder weathers were encountered. This required man to cover himself. The earliest coverings were animal skins, furs, grass, and leaves. Animal skins or leather first started being used as tents, so as dwellings. And later on, they started being used for shoes or also as clothing. The first clothing or covering were crudely draped natural things like animal skin. So they just would drape it like we drape a shawl. The first clothing must have been a tunic. They must have created holes in it for head and arms, and then they started wearing. So that was the first piece of clothing. It is only when the needles were invented in 60,000 years ago that they might have started sewing the leather and making clothes. The oldest shoe found is 55,000 years old, which is this actual photograph of the oldest shoe found, 5,500 years old. Now, how do we know how long back men started using clothes? This is because body lice, which are bugs we have, all of us have in our clothes and hair, all of us have. Now, the scientists have studied body lice, which occurs only in fabric and only over man's body, human being's body. And that is why, and these lice die when the fabric is taken away from the human. So you can imagine it is a pretty interesting and pretty sharp investigation. That study of body lice can actually tell us when man started using fabric. First, we have been talking about leather or animal skins. Now we are talking about fabric. Fabric is made from the fibers. And the simplest form of fabric which was the earliest one about 1 lakh years ago, was felt. Felt is not woven or knitted, it is just compressed. So fibers like wool or flax, if they're compressed together, or animal hair, they're compressed together to make a sheet, and that might have been the first clothing in form of fibers, use of fibers. The oldest woven cloth, you know, there is warps and wefts, is 3000 BC, 5,000 years ago from Egypt. So please understand that before 3000 BC, no piece of clothing has been found. And the oldest knitted cloth, knitted, we know that we make sweaters or our clothes like the socks are knitted. So oldest one is 300 CE, which is just about 2000 years old. Next, we go on to a very important subject as an invention, and that is art. Art, in particular in form of sculpture. First, we are going to talk about sculpture and paintings. These are objects made for narrative, philosophical, symbolic, decorative, and even functional purposes, but it must have some aesthetic form. It must be pleasing to the eye. So that is art. Now, you will be very surprised and happy to know the oldest example of stationary art. Stationary art means on the walls or stones, is in Bhimbetka, India. This is a simple figure which is called cupule and meander. It is just one circular depression, and on one side there is something like a small snake, and this is supposed to be the oldest art existing in the world. This is 2 lakh years old. But then about 45,000 years back, the oldest painting on the walls of cave is called the pig. Now this is in Indonesia 45,000 years ago. Man started painting around his hands 40,000 years ago. In Bhimbetka also there are paintings which are about 10,000 years old, and then there are carvings on the walls which are there all over the world. I'm giving you an example of Edekal caves in Kerala. You must visit it. These are 8,000 years old carvings which are called petroglyphs. So this was the beginning of art. What is called as non-stationary art or sculptures, the oldest is 40,000 years old, which is made from mammoth, which is the older version of elephants, ivory of that. And this is found in a cave called Hohle cave in Germany. And from the same place, first human figure was found, which is called the Venus of Hohle, which is 35,000 years ago. So please, my friends, these two figures that you see are the oldest sculptures in the world so far found. So far found only we can say there might have been older which are not found, so we don't consider them. Surprisingly, the sculpture took on the form of Venus in the early man's hands. These were altered female figures. Instead of head, either a small knob or only a sphere was shown with large body parts like this. And surprisingly, the similar figure also figures as the first ceramic art. So first ceramic art, which is 29,000 years old, is found in Czech Republic. So we can say that these were the early statues. Then the sculptures came onto in form of toys and many other forms. So art grew. We know where it is, where it has reached. We know how art developed in India also. This figure of a girl that we see metallic is a Harappan figure. And all over the world, in Egypt and Greece and Rome and India, art developed very fast in the later years. But there is historic period. We are on to prehistoric period. Art is not only paintings and the sculptures. It is also music and performing arts. The oldest flute, which actually plays even today, is 35,000 years old. And these flutes have been found, which are in Germany, which are made from mammoth bones or swan bones. Hans na bones. Similarly, there have been masks which are 9,000 years old. These masks were made from stone. And the masks also indicate that they must have been used in some form of ritual activity or form of drama. So these are just touching upon other forms of art. The sixth, pottery. Pottery is a process of forming objects with the clay fired at a very high temperature to make it hard and durable. The clay has always been abundant. So man must have found very early in his development that the clay, when made wet, can be made into shapes. And that is why, because it was an easy thing to do, it is found out that pottery must have been developed, invented in many parts of the world simultaneously. It did not come from one place. The earliest form of making pottery objects were these three: hand shaping, beating, and coiling. My wife is a ceramist and she uses this last form pretty commonly. And that is long thread-like things are made and then they are wound over each other to make a pot. Why do we have to make pot? Why did they have to make pot like this? Why not on a potter's wheel? Because potter's wheel was invented much later. Earliest figures of clay are unfired clay. So these are untreated clay and they are 30,000 years old. Now, once the clay started being fired, heated, it was initially done in open fires. And then with the development of cooking of food, they found out that they can even make closed fires or kilns. So then closed fires made this art of pottery very fast. The oldest pottery fragments found are from Japan, which are 16,000 years old. And they are called Jomon pottery fragments. And Jomon art also developed in a big way in the lower right figure that we see. The oldest fired pottery object actually is 29,000 years old figure, which we have already seen. The pottery wheel came as first turnets. Those who know something about pottery or ceramic would know what is a turnet. Turnet is just, we sometimes have it on our dining table. It is just a circular dish sort of thing, flat, which can be rotated. So we can pass the food bowls in different directions. So that is just stationary and one can put something on it and then rotate it to form, give it a form. So there were the turnets, which must have been around 4,500 BC, but the fast wheel, which is rotated fast to make pots, which is called potter's wheel, started in 3200 BC in Mesopotamia or today's Iraq. The earliest wheels must have been heavy, strong discs of clay or wood, and they were balanced on a fixed point. And gradually, the wheels, like the central one with spokes, came. Now, potter's wheel allowed food, surplus, and water to be stored in pots. Now, you can understand, how one invention leads to development of other, or basically leads to the development of the human brain. Because potter's wheel could make large pots. You can see the man in the middle making a huge pot. The food and water could be stored. Before that, man did not have any way of storing food. If it could be stored, he had a spare time. Larger pots could be made using much less clay because of potter's wheel. So more pots could be made from the same amount of resources, and pots also could be created faster, and that is why they could finish this work faster, and they had spare time for other technical advances. You can understand how one thing led to another. Pottery also was used as an artistic expression. All of the things we see are prehistoric, and some are lower one. For example, the toy is from Indus Valley. Next is seventh, and that is agriculture. You see, these things came much later, and we might have thought that wheel came very early, but you will see that wheel came so late in the history. The art and science of cultivating the soil and growing crops and raising livestock is a very simplistic definition of agriculture. Though man started eating wild seeds and wild plants, 1 lakh years ago, he started eating wild things. Small cultivations of edible grass started almost 20,000 years ago. So when he found something which was tasty, was not causing any harm, then he started growing them again and again. But that is not actual agriculture. Actual agriculture started 10,000 years ago, and that required man to settle down. Initially, there was a theory that agriculture developed that allowed the man to settle down and form townships. But it has been now proven that first man had to settle down. And this occurred when man came from Africa. You can see the map. Man came from Africa to the area which is today's Israel, Iraq, and Jordan, etc. That is where man started settling down because the conditions were good. There were good plains with grass, etc. And so this occurred 15,000 years ago. And then 10,000 years ago, he started developing agriculture in this area. This area is called Levant, which is current Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. So this was the place where he had to cross while coming from Africa. And there was 1,000-year period of relative drought. So man could not find food easily, and he had to grow. So he started planting wild seeds because of that drought, which was the seed of agriculture also. From Levant, the knowledge of agriculture spread towards Mesopotamia, which is today's Iraq, and towards Egypt, that is the plains of the Nile. So this you can see is a reverse crescent. This is called the Fertile Crescent. This is where agriculture developed in that era. He started growing founder crops, which were the initial crops, 10,000 to 7,500 years ago. And those seeds which could grow easily, which grew easily, lasted longer on the plant. They grew bigger, could be stored, had better taste and nutrition, were grown again and again. In the process, those seeds were modified and the other perished. So they disappeared. And the first things to be cultivated were two types of early wheat, barley. I've written the Indian version in the brackets, lentil, pea, chickpea, bitter veg, and flax. Flax is shorn. So these are called the founder crops. These are 8 early crops that man started growing. Later, in 1,000 or 2,000 years, he started growing a lot of other things like rice, potato, maize, millet, pepper, tomato, and whatnot. Then the agriculture and the knowledge kept on growing. Agriculture soon developed at multiple places, again, unrelated. So have you realized in invention, certain things started at one place and then spread to the other place? And there are some inventions which started at multiple places in the world simultaneously, and they were unrelated. There was no communication. Nobody gave this knowledge. And these green areas are ones where early agriculture started, and then they grew in these areas. So by 5,000 years ago, agriculture was at many places well established. Now, agriculture also required lots of developments. One was end of Ice Age, which occurred 10,000 years ago. So when Ice Age ended, the green pastures occurred and agriculture was possible. Clothing was necessary. Domestication of animals became necessary for agriculture, and that helped agriculture. Similarly, lots of equipments like stone sticks, sickles, the mortar, the pottery, grinding stones, etc., came in handy to process the agricultural produce. Now, actually, the digging was done for agriculture by hand digging or a hoe. And this gave way to plow, hurl, what you call, the 8,000 years ago, again in Mesopotamia and Indus. That was also together with the domestication of ox. So the plowing made agriculture easier. And this is a toy that I have shown here. There were carts pulled by bullocks and other animals which could transport the agricultural produce. So this whole nexus allowed agriculture to develop as we know. One great thing that happened was man's nomadic life changed to a sedentary life because of agriculture, and man settled down and towns came about. And that is why also surplus food, better nutrition, and sparing of manpower, which occurred because of agriculture, again set a stage for more developments, including trade, art, and culture, because man had spare time because of agriculture and he had settled down in one place. The eighth is domestication of animals. Here I learned something very interesting, that taming of animals and domestication of animals are two entirely different things. Taming is a behavioral modification of a wild-born animal when it accepts the presence of human beings, but he remains wild. I'll give you an example, and here is a typical example I have given is a tiger in a circus. It is tamed, it is not domesticated, so it remains wild. On the other hand, domestication is a permanent genetic modification. The genetic getup of the animal changes over thousands of years or lakhs of years. And this is a bred lineage, means it passes on to the other generations, and there is a predisposition for affection towards human beings. So that is domestication. In domestication, there are actual anatomical and physiological changes which occur in these animals. These animals may even change their dentures. Their brain becomes smaller because now they are dependent on man. Their fur, their tails also can change. So there are actually changes which occur in these animals. The earliest domestication was dogs. Dogs were first to be domesticated 35,000 BC. And the animals were domesticated for a variety of purposes, as friends, as guards, for their produce like milk or fur, their meat, and also for transport and work like horses, bull, camel, and donkey. But the dog was the first to be domesticated because man lived in proximity of wolves. And some wolves were less ferocious. So some men must have found out that these wolves are less ferocious, so they started probably feeding them and being with them. And those wolves started living with man and developed into dogs. Dogs also changed man's eating habits. Man was initially largely vegetarian, but because the dog was meat eating, man also started becoming meat eating more and more. Dogs could help him guard against predators, carry supplies, pull sleds in snow, and even provide warmth during cold nights. The next group of animals to be domesticated were hooved herbivores. We know what is hooved herbivores, like sheep, goat, cow. They started being domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, which we know by now. These were the easiest animals to domesticate because they were vegetarian. They could feed on whatever vegetable was available. It was not necessary for humans to get them meat. So otherwise, if they were meat-eating animals, man had to hunt, get meat, and then feed them. So that was also not necessary. So sheep and goats were used for their meat, milk, and coats. As we know, cattle like cows and buffaloes also helped as working animals, and that helped improve agriculture. Horses came in much, much later. You probably know Indus Valley did not have horses or even knowledge of horses. Aryans must have brought horses with them, which occurred much later. Horses appeared in Stone Age paintings 30,000 years ago, but these were paintings of wild horses, not domesticated horses. Domestication of horses occurred in Eurasian steppes. In this map, find out India in the lower part, so you know what area is this. This is the greenish band that we see is the Western Europe, part of Russia, right up to China. This area is called steppes. And this is where a lot of agriculture developed and the domestication developed. But Volga region, which is near Moscow, is the area where horses were first domesticated. According to one theory, this is also the area where Aryans arose and then came to the Indus Valley and changed the entire Indian history. They moved towards Gangetic Valley and rest of the India. So on a timeline, if we see, there is a great difference between domestication of dog and then other animals. These are the hoofed herbivores, as we say, including cat. We see that they were domesticated within a time span of just about 1,500 years, much later than dogs. And then came domestication of horse and buffalo, and then chicken and duck and many other animals. So this is a very rough but easily understandable timeline of domestication of animals. The ninth invention is wheel. You understand the wheel comes so late in the story. Man must have seen logs or boulders, rounded rocks or wooden logs rolled down the slopes. So he realized that there is something curious and it can be used, and that is how wheels must have been invented. The earliest wheels were solid wood wheels like this, and they must have started about 6,000 BC or 8,000 years ago. The wheel is one of the key component of wheel and axle, which is one of the 6 simple machines. Let me talk about these machines. There are basically 6 simple machines like screw, the wheel, slope, etc., which were invented in Mesopotamia. And though Mesopotamia has been acclaimed as the birthplace of wheel, because wheel also was easy to invent, it must have been invented at multiple places in the world simultaneously, probably including China, India, and Europe. The invention of wheel also gave rise to potter's wheel, which we have already seen 4,000 BC in Mesopotamia, and we know how potter's wheel changed the mankind. The earliest wheel found is 3000 BC in Slovenia, a broken wheel like that, and its axle. It is in the museum there. Early chariots used solid wheels. So early use of wheels was solid wheels. And this pot that we see and the picture that I've shown, though it looks like a hut, it is interpreted as a chariot with 4 wheels. And this is probably the oldest evidence that there were 4-wheeled vehicles. 3,500 years ago found, this pot is found in Poland. Gradually, the wheels evolved and became spoked. So they were lighter and they could be used in faster vehicles and potter's wheel. The spoked wheel on the left side is an amulet, which is a sort of a locket, 4000 BC in Mehergarh. I wonder if you know what is Mehergarh. Mehergarh is one of the very, very important prehistoric site in the world. It could have been in India, but it was actually found after independence in Pakistan. So this is a Stone Age site in Pakistan where this spoked wheel was found. Now, the last 2 are very, very interesting inventions, and that is 11th is still more interesting. The 10th is monogamy and marriage. If I ask this august audience, when do you think man became monogamous? Means male started living with one female, or female started living with one man. And you might say that it might have been 20,000, 10,000 years ago. You will be surprised to know that monogamy is much older than that. Now, considering monogamy, and I'm not going to get into great details, the monogamy can be social, which is like marriage, as we know. Sexual means a person decides to have sex only with one person, and even genetic. Genetic monogamy means the 2 persons have decided that if they have children, they would be only through that couple. So that is genetic monogamy. But monogamy, you do know, is entirely different from marriage. Marriage is a different issue, though it is related to, but it is not synonymous with monogamy. Monogamy started 35 lakh years ago. That is even before Homo habilis. But it never became universal, not even now. 35 lakhs. I mean, why did man become monogamous? Very interesting story we will see in a few minutes. Patriarchy, which is male dominance in the society, also is almost 20 lakh years. We can't say the patriarchy started a few thousand years ago and man became predominant. There were reasons, anatomical and others. The female had to be, it was almost a handicap, should not be called a handicap, but he was homebound because of the pregnancies and childbirth and child care. Now, there have been theories why man became monogamous. One theory is the female spacing hypothesis, very interesting, that females began to need larger territories for access to limited food sources. Why? Because man was growing large, brain required a lot of nutrition. And there is these children required so much nutrition and the mother required it for herself that the female required a large area to forage. Now, like we know in the sanctuaries, there is a territory of tiger and no other male tiger would enter it. Like that, the females required a large area to find food. And this put a distance between one female from another. And now males, it was harder time to find and keep multiple mates because the females were at a distance. So males must have started to stick to one female. Prevent infanticide. Primates, even apes and early man was uniquely at risk for infanticide. Big brains needed more time to develop. And that is why the child was with the mother for a long time. And males require the female for sexual activity. And this made the males kill the infants in apes and also in early man. And that is why rival males tended to kill infants to free the females from such duty to have the female to himself. And that is why if the female had one male protecting her, then the infanticide also could reduce. To have a steady provider, because the female was incapacitated when there was a baby because she had to feed it. And that is why presence of one father, one male with her increased the closer ties and also allowed better growth of the child. While marriage is different. Marriage is a union that is sanctioned by law, society, or customs, and that prescribes rights and duties to the partners and accords a status to their offspring. Marriages need not be monogamous. They were never universally monogamous. It has not been monogamous always, nor everywhere, even now. In the world, there are considered 238 societies, out of which only 43 are monogamous. And the marriages probably started earliest marriages started in early Greece, Rome, and in Vedic era. And it must have been about 1000 BC. But monogamous marriages became widespread only 1000 years back. These were 3000 years back, 1000 years back. They might have become more monogamous. But in India, surprisingly, the Hindu marriages became monogamous through an act in 1956 only. So that is very, very recent. So monogamy preceded marriage, and marriage still are not universally monogamous. The last and the most interesting is the advent of religion. I'll just take 2-3 minutes and then we end this. If it is said all societies have religion, it must have a social purpose. We can't say religion is useless. If it were useless, it would have been invented only in some parts, and only part of the world should have been using it. Vast majority of societies have religion, and that is why it must have a social purpose. But let us see how it started. Even some chimpanzees dance at the onset of heavy rain and near a waterfall. And some consider it that this is a ritualistic behavior which might be akin to religion. Some chimpanzees are known to build temples. We see here, there is a pile of rocks in the hollow of a tree. This happens at many places where chimpanzees live, and chimpanzees are known to sit in front of it in a group quietly or bowing down. So is it religion? Some people consider it is. But most importantly, the funeral rites. When an animal dies, particularly the African remain around it and they actually look sad, and sometimes they bury dead elephants with plenty of food and flowers. Elephants are also known to bury other animals like rhinoceros and even man. So it is sometimes seen that dead body of a man is buried by an elephant. So this is considered a very primitive form of religion. But ultimately what happened was, in man, the neocortex, which is shown in blue, grew. And this is responsible for perception, thought, language, memory, and involuntary movements. So man started thinking. The spirituality and religion must have been an offshoot of this. And growth of neocortex set the stage for development of religion. Now, this allowed man to create a mental imagery, which is necessary for planning to make tools. See, we have to think of when he was making a tool, he had to think what is the next step, and where he would use it. So the planning also ultimately went on to become philosophical thought. Then he started understanding inevitability of death and starting mourning the dead. Communication necessary for religion was facilitated by development of first fire and then spoken languages and later writing. And because of group living, morality developed. That we know, non-violence and no stealing, etc., developed as a morality. This must have sown seeds for religion. Man started ritual burial almost 1 lakh years ago. So he would bury the dead with a ritual, would put things with it, precious things that he thought were precious. This was the first stage of development of religion. For oldest burial site has been found in Israel, which is 1 lakh years old. We have already considered the Venus figurines, and they must have had some form of religion, religious meaning, and particularly the figure which is on the right side is supposed to be probably a goddess. So this thought grew into many forms. Naturalism, which is natural events like lightning, etc., man started fearing and then worshipping. Animism is importance of plants, animals. Fetishism is symbolic figures like Venus figures, charms, voodoo. Shamanism. Shaman is supposed to be a person who could communicate with spirits. The way bhua we know in our culture. Hedonism is pursuit of short-term gratification, for example, sex as sensory pleasure, and these all separately or together grew into religions. The oldest temple, so far considered the Stonehenge of UK 3000 BC, has been replaced by new finding, and that is the Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is 9000 BC. So this place is thought to be the oldest temple today, so far found and today surviving. As far as our religions are concerned, it is considered there was an axial age, 900 to 200 BC, where all the religions started in their early roots. And they grew to be the religions we know. And 5 major events changed the religious aspect of the world. First was advent of Jainism and Sanatana Dharma, which occurred about 800, 900 BC. You understand, please, Jainism in that way is older than Buddhism and even Hinduism as we call it, because the Hinduism as we know is just 2000 years old. Sanatana Dharma is almost 3000 years old, which is the infant form or the embryo of Hinduism. Buddhism started spreading in a big way. Christianization occurred of the Western world after year 0. And then there was decline of Buddhism and rise of Hinduism and ultimately spread of Islam. And in modern times, after 1500 CE, there has been little change in this. Only the same religions have spread, they have branched out, there have been sects and minor religions originated, but the major religions all were originated in the ancient times, as we mentioned. So we end this talk by a simple timeline of all these inventions. 25 lakh year back, the use of tools and then control of fire, etc., language, clothing, art, ritual, and domestication, right up to marriage, which is the youngest invention. And that is where I conclude my talk of prehistoric inventions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, superb, Tejas bhai. Really, you have researched the topic. I must appreciate that. It's just not, these things are not available in any book. So you really had to work very hard for making this happen. Now, I request everyone, like, if you want to ask question, please use the raise hand button, because that will only give us the information. Yeah, so there is iCore iPhone, Dr. Narendra Bhai Rawal. Yeah, please. Yeah, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Tejas bhai, I have heard you more than 50 times, but today's lecture is excellent.
Thank you so much.
What do you provide the material? Even we can't think regarding that. So I request you tell you the how much time we have you taken for preparing the lecture.
This over 2 years or so, it was a growing thought in my mind. But then in last 3 months, I put a lot of effort, because the problem is not writing this or collecting this. Problem is shortening this, because once you enter into something, there is immense literature on control of fire. There might be hundreds of pages. So then one has to find out and shorten it. One should not even leave out important details and not keep unnecessary details to make it such a short. I talked about each invention just for 3-4 minutes. That was more difficult time than actually finding the literature.
But if you provide the time 3 to 4 minutes for one invention, but you sum up like anything.
Yeah, because nobody would be interested if I'm talking for 1 hour on say control of fire or domestication of animals. And that is why this is what we need to know. Like in history, I mean, and you know that I have written a brief book on entire history of India. So that is what we need to know. As intelligent people, educated people, at least this much we should know. Now, in this, if you remember only 20%, that is good that we know the roots of mankind.
Even I wish you publish this book in the future. Thank you very much.
At least I can make a PDF.
Yeah, thank you. Tejas bhai, I just had a question. Like some of the figures which you showed in this, they were really obese people. So is it really that at that point also people were overweight? Yes. Or it's
because there was no limit. There was nothing like health. They could eat whatever they could. So they gained weight according to available food and lack of disease. If they were not diseased and the food was available, and those fat figures, they were Venus figures. Yes, they were meant to be like that. That is how they were worshipped, because obesity in a female was considered fecundity, that is sexual prowess, and ability to produce children. And that is why the fat figures of female without a head, almost, or a small ball of a head, but large body parts, was a different thing. But if we see figures in carvings in many places in our temples and all, they were not slim. They were not obese. But I mean, we know the difference between overweight and obese. So they were all shown overweight. Their body parts, female body parts and all, if you see the backs, the buttocks and all, they were all shown, because there was no concept of this. And way of exercise was, there was a class which was exercising, there was a large majority who were not exercising. And that is why, and we know that they used to have a very short lifespan, lots of diseases, and must have had obesity problem.
How many places you have seen actually, Tejas bhai?
How many?
Of this places?
No,
like
none. None. I have not traveled outside India. I've seen those Bhimbetka thing. I have been to the Kerala caves, but I have not traveled much outside India. I want to finish India, almost finish India first, yes, and then go out. Only 2-3 trips I have had, besides the ones to my children in US, which I won't consider trips. Only 2-3 trips out of India. Göbekli Tepe, for example, if somebody asks me, why do you want to go to Turkey? I would say Göbekli Tepe, which I know for many years now, and nobody would understand what is that. Many of you must have visited Turkey. You haven't been to Göbekli Tepe. That is the place to see. 9,000 years old temple. That is a real Tirtham of the world.
True.
And many sites have been in Turkey, because the Central Asia and Western Europe have been a place where early men developed. Many sites were damaged in this earthquake.
Yeah, so Tejas bhai, it was a wonderful presentation, and because we don't have any questions, and I think that the topic is so well presented that there cannot be much question, because everyone were like impressed with the way you presented. So I thank everyone for joining the session, and we will let you know for the future session very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.
Tejas bhai, it was excellent.
Thank you, Neelavan. Thank you.
We had a good knowledge from this.
Okay, good night.
Good night, sir. મજા આવી હે તેની. એટલું સરસ રીતે પ્રેઝન્ટ કરે છે really.
કેટલી મહેનત કરી હશે.
Yeah, એ તો છે. Dita, how do I leave from here now?